Hi everyone, it's Charlie. We're in front of a hydraulics trainer here because we're going to start a series of videos that are introducing basic concepts of hydraulics. And we'll be talking a little bit about the different components in a hydraulic system, some of the basic principles that apply to hydraulics, and I'll tell you what I tell my hydraulics students at the school. That hydraulics, even if you're not going to be a heavy equipment tech working on a backhoe or something, hydraulics is still important because it plays a role in an engine's lubrication system and how the automatic transmissions work and things like that. So it plays a role in everything. So we're going to be covering each component one at a time, going through a system. And in episode 1, we are going to be talking about hydraulic tanks. So of course, a hydraulic tank and an actual piece of equipment would probably look much different than this one, but it'll get the point across. So the first thing we need to know about hydraulic tanks is what is their purpose? What are the things that they are responsible for doing in the system, right? So number one is the obvious one. It stores the fluid, right? So we can see fluid stored in this tank. The second one, a little less obvious. It allows room for contaminants to settle. So anything that might make it back into here past a return tank, when you shut the machine off, it's going to allow fine metal shavings and things like that to settle into the bottom of that tank. That's one of the reasons why when you do regularly scheduled fluid changes that you really need to make sure you're cleaning these tanks out, because eventually that contamination that settles in conditions and gets down to the bottom is going to get sucked back up into the system, causing some extensive hydraulic system damage. So that's the second thing. So we know it stores, now we know it conditions, and the third thing, which is also really important, is that it cools. Not so much on our trainer right here, but most of your hydraulic tanks out in the field are going to be steel, aluminum, something that's going to transfer the heat that the hydraulic fluid picked up in the system and transfer it out to the atmosphere. All right. So different types of tanks that you might encounter are vented and pressurized, right? So if we look at this one right here, up at the top right here, we got a little vent. And what that vent does is it allows air pressure to come into the tank. So when the pump starts spinning and pulling a vacuum, you need something pushing down on the fluid so that the fluid wants to fill that vacuum. So you need to allow air in. But then also, if the fluid starts to get hot, it wants to expand, it needs to be able to force any extra air out of the tank. So a vent allows both things to happen. And it's critically important. Without having a vent here, and you weren't pressurizing the tank, nothing would make the fluid go to fill the pump when it started creating a vacuum, and that's when we would have pump cavitation, right? So it's one of the many reasons for pump cavitation. We'll get more into that when we get into pumps, but so we need the vent. Then you might have equipment designed for high elevations or uneven terrains where the fluid might move back and forth in the reservoir, and you might want to move away from a vented reservoir and go to a pressurized reservoir. And a pressurized reservoir is just going to use an outside air source that's going to put something equivalent or close to atmospheric pressure of 14.7. So might have 15 psi, might have 20 psi, but it's going to help maintain that level of air pressure despite high elevations or altitude changes or elevation changes. So that type of system is a sealed system. So basically, you think of the hydraulic tank as the guy that holds your fluid, keeps it there for you, make sure you have enough to fill the pump, fill the system, do the jobs you're trying to do, and then it also allows a place for fluid to settle. Also going along that vein of allowing a place for contaminants to settle, is that in most tanks, if you're kind of doing a DIY project and you're building a hydraulic tank, please make sure that you separate the return line and the supply line. The last thing you want is hot, dirty hydraulic fluid coming back into the tank and then immediately getting sucked right back up into the system. Separate them, put a baffle between them, but you don't want them together. So this was episode 1. We just discussed the basic hydraulic tanks. Hope you guys learned something. Keep an eye out for episode 2. We're going to be discussing pumps. So that's going to be a good one. Thank you. Like and subscribe.